Sony's PlayStation 5 Pro is on track to be an immensely powerful machine, and according to developers who have been speaking behind closed doors, it is an entirely different beast when compared to either the Xbox Series X or PlayStation 5 base model systems when running Unreal Engine 5 and its capabilities of delivering truly next-generation visuals and experiences. In fact, it could be much more like what a high-end PC is capable of in terms of visual fidelity. In this video then, I want to talk to you guys about all the rumours and try to make sense of it, because it's much more than just there are more T-flops on the GPU. There are a lot of different elements which are coming together in the system to really make these experiences possible. I also want to give you some updates too regarding the pricing and release dates, because, well, there are a lot of rumours now since we're getting apparently closer to the machine's launch. And we're going to get into all of that plus more after this quick message from the sponsor of the video. If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices. So let's start things out with the release information as well as pricing for the PlayStation 5 Pro, because at this stage, several folks in the industry, including veterans such as Jeff Grubb, are all pointing to a September announcement for the console. As far as I understand, speaking to multiple sources, this is 100% true. Now, according to my own sources, they've just told me things like reveal is imminent very soon, down to specifics like September, but I do not know whether this is at a state of play event or whether this is going to be an entirely separate event. Grubb believes that the date could be at the end of September, but the base model console obviously has seen quite a lot of price increases in specific regions, and his own sources are basically saying that the PS5 Pro could be $600 to a eye-watering $700 US, but maybe the release could be earlier than November. I'm still hearing, as well as others, November is the target, but either way, basically at this stage, at the end of November 2024, providing nothing massive changes, you should be able to pick up a PS5 Pro. Now, could there be delay? In theory, I guess, but it seems extremely unlikely at this point. Developers have been briefed and now are openly talking about this stuff, providing you don't attribute names to them or the studio. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Documents are now floating around and you can download them from PlayStation development portals, and long story short, the console is very real. It is extremely powerful, and I think it's going to really open a lot of people's eyes what consoles can actually do, especially for things like Unreal Engine 5, which is going to be the main topic of this video. So let's get into some of the rumours, shall we, regarding this, because WCCF Tech recently ran an article where Alessio, hopefully I've pronounced that correctly, one of their reporters, was at Gamescom. Now, he basically said that the console was an open secret, and without being prodded by me at all, he said, a developer that I won't name openly said that they had received specs of the PS5 Pro and were confident that Unreal Engine 5 would run much better on the hardware compared to the regular base model console. Now, he also said that he doesn't believe this is the same developer that other outlets such as Multiplayer have spoken to, and he also adds that the studio wasn't a big one at all. Now, this is really key because a developer, you know, normally large studios, for example, Capcom or Ubisoft and, you know, so on and so forth, they get briefed first, well, after, of course, Sony's own internal studios, and that's a really big thing, by the way. Sony's own studios, for example, Naughty Dog and so on and so forth, they basically help provide a lot of feedback to Sony. So if there's, for example, should we go with more compute? Should we go with a wider design? Should we have this? Should we do that? And basically the studios kind of, it's basically like an iterative process with design, and this is one of the reasons Sony studios work so closely with one another. It's actually very fascinating. Maybe we'll talk about it more in another video, as I don't want to derail this one too much, but this is pretty much what I've been hearing as well. When I was hearing a lot of the rumors and I was leaking the specs of the PS5 Pro early on, I was getting some information from big development studios, but I was also getting some information from other sources that I can't really go into. But now it's not that point anymore. We're at the point where even smaller studios have either seen the documents or at the very least they know the state of play, if you excuse the pun, of the PS5 Pro, because essentially they've just been speaking to other development friends. Just as an example, you might have you might work at a small studio, you might be, like a solo developer, but maybe you have a friend who works at an absolutely massive studio. Like, it's not, you kind of go to these big events and it just is what it is. Like, people speak to one another, off the record and so on. It is what it is. Anyway, now let's talk about the specs of the console. I'm not going to go over these too extensively because we've spoken about them exhaustively in multiple videos before, but basically the CPU is essentially identical to that of the previous system. The clock frequencies vary on the CPU and the GPU a little bit. And the CPU here can run a little bit faster, but as far as I understand, it still has the AVX, the AVX 256 cut a little bit and other bits and bobs, but basically it's the same CPU. The major advancements here come to us via improvements to the bandwidth, memory, and the GPU. So it's an RDNA 3.5, which is pretty much like Strix Point, which is actually a range of APUs that AMD are releasing. There's also Strix Point Halo, which is rumored to release at CES next year. RDNA 4, which is an upcoming GPU, which is probably going to be releasing maybe early next year. We're already seeing prototypes of it on the desktop. So basically the ray tracing units are RDNA 4, whereas the rest of the GPU, the workgroup processors and so on, they seem to be more based on RDNA 3.5, at least according to a lot of the rumors. There's 30 workgroup processors active, or 60 compute units. There's 2 compute units per 1 workgroup processor, and this spits out around 33.5 to 36.1 teraflops of performance. Ray tracing performance is 2 to 4x over the base model console, according to the documents that Digital Foundry and others have obtained, and the custom machine learning element of the console is really impressive. It can handle 300 TOPS, those are running 8-bit precision, and this is used for things like PSSR, or PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution. If you're familiar with NVIDIA's DLSS, it's pretty similar to that. From what I'm hearing, it's really, really good. And secondly, the rumor is that it's going to continue to be advanced significantly, particularly when we get into the PS6. The memory configuration is basically the same as the base model console, albeit the memory is running faster. So it's 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 running at 256-bit bus at 18 Gbps, but this gives us more memory bandwidth. But the amount of memory available to developers is up. So we have 13.7 available for developers, thanks to numerous enhancements to the console. So I've also been speaking to developers, and I'm told that the information that WCCF Tech and other outlets is running is very true. A lot of games are very heavy on Unreal Engine 5 on the GPU. Lumen, Nanite are a couple of examples for this, although there are many others. Yes, the CPU can get hammered, but you can also start putting a lot of crap which was on CPU and run it as like compute. This is not always the case. This is not a silver bullet. There are certainly examples where you cannot do this, but basically speaking, the reason Unreal Engine 5 runs so much better is not just because more teraflops. I mean, partly it is, but it's boiling it down to such a simple equation that the math no longer works. You're missing so many elements. It's no longer the answer. It's just kind of like it's like if I gave you the directions to go to the supermarket and I just said go down that road, but I also forgot to kind of say, yeah, halfway down the road you need to take a left and then you need to drive until you see Micro Avenue, and then you need to take a right, and then you need to go down there. It's like I'm only giving you part of the answer is essentially what I'm saying. So the other things include, but certainly are not limited to, big improvements on the cache design, bandwidth increases, and I don't just mean on GDDR6, APIs, and a bunch of other enhancements. Now, it's worth noting that at this point, we do not know everything. Although the documents have leaked, of course, there are still things which we do not understand, and I'm sure that we're going to learn a lot more about this at some point or another. Regardless, Digital Foundry did leak the cache configuration of RDNA GPU in the PS5 Pro. I want to zero in on L0, 1, and 2. I'm just going to tell you the numbers, but do be aware this is not the totality when we're talking about L1 and L0. But I just want to give you kind of an indication, and then we'll go into exactly what each does. So L2 is the highest level cache, and that's still 4 megabytes. So that's the same as the PS5. L1 is 256 kilobytes. That is double that of the base machine. L0 is 32, which again is double that of the base machine. Now, what does actually this mean? Now, L0 is very similar to the configuration we find in RDNA 3, as you can see in this image here. These are for compute pairs. So again, there are tons of these compute pairs on the GPU, and so each of these has an L0. L1, meanwhile, is split across the shader engines. And again, the increase in cache here is massive. I'm going to provide you guys an N31 block diagram just to help you visualize this. Be aware that this is for a desktop GPU. It's for something like the 7900 XT or XTX. And so the PS5 Pro is going to look very different. But it's just to give you a basic understanding of how workgroup processors, shader arrays, and engines kind of fit into the grand scheme of things. Now, for reference, the PS5 Pro configuration, again, according to the leaks anyway, it seems to be 2 shader engines, 4 shader arrays. So basically, each SE contains 2 SA. And this is in an 8.7 configuration. What the hell does that mean? Well, basically, in this particular case, again, there are 4 shader arrays. So each of these shader arrays contains 8 workgroup processors. So if you do 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8, you come to 32. But remember how there's only 30 workgroup processors enabled? So that's why we have 8.7. So basically, shader array, let's just call it, for sake of discussion, shader array V and X. Let's just say hypothetically that the one of the shader arrays under shader engine 1 has a workgroup process disabled, and the same thing could be said for another shader array in the other shader engine. This is basically just for yield purposes. Now, again, there are 32 workgroup processors on the die, but 30 are active. So 32 on the die, but 30 are active. This is the same configuration that Kepler L2 leaked quite a while back, and also myself when I was talking about the PS5 Pro specs. This is before, of course, the documents became true. This is before, by the way, the documents started to emerge. Now, why is all of this important? Well, L0 is particularly important for ray tracing performance. This is because it's used to hold BVH information. BVH, by the way, is a bounding volume hierarchy. Basically, BVH is almost like the scene data. It's basically like a structure of how the scene is constructed in terms of ray tracing. It's a very complicated topic. NVIDIA do some really good breakdowns of this, so you can Google BVH explanation NVIDIA and it will come up. It's way outside the topic for me to kind of go into how BVH works for this, but just for simplicity's sake, just say that it's a way of sorting scene data if you want the basics. L0 is very, very low latency. And again, it's basically right on top of the shaders. So because of this, you can see a significant uptick in performance due to BVH being quite sensitive to this. By the way, Sony themselves say that this was a really big element of ray tracing being faster. L1, meanwhile, could be really good for nanite. Things like compute shaders, texturing, and so on. Now, as you saw from that previous image, there's a significant improvement in also raw bandwidth. So basically speaking, what you have is just more data being transferred per clock cycle. Now, this is really important because while we don't have confirmation that this bandwidth has been increased over the reference PS5, at least in the documents that Digital Foundry obtained. It seems to be very true because of what I've heard from developers, but also it just seems to be part of the fundamentals of RDNA 3 and RDNA 3.5, which again is found in APUs such as Strix Point. Therefore, you have basically a double whammy. You can store more data locally to the shaders, but you've also got more bandwidth to fetch and use as the data is needed. And while it's not exactly applicable because the chips are pretty different, again, we're going back to N31 here, which is, as I said, desktop focused. And also the PS5 Pro is using RDNA 3.5. And, well, we also don't know what tweaks Sony have implemented in the PS5 Pro. You can see a few examples here of how the lower level caches of RDNA 3, this is, by the way, an article on Chips and Cheese, which do some really good work. You can see how the lower level caches of RDNA 3 are significantly better than RDNA 2. So essentially RDNA 3.5 improves this even more. But long story short, the takeaway here is the latency and bandwidth across the GPU is just so much better. So I'm also told that there are some improvements in the design choices for data management within the caches. The PS5 has the data scrubbers, which essentially help evict data from the caches, which are just not required anymore. And it does so very well. It basically, the developers don't really need to do anything. And evicting and making sure that data is up to date is really important because you're dealing with so many different levels of cache, so many different parts of cache. It becomes really important to make sure that you don't have duplicate data across the cache. You also need to make sure that data is where it needs to be. So you start, it becomes a really, really complicated topic, like data management across caches, way outside the topic of this video. But if you get a cache miss on like L1 and it needs to go to L2 to see, oh, by the way, is this data here? And it's like, no, sorry, we had to just chuck that out a while ago because, yeah, we needed to pull something else in. Then it needs to go to GDDR6. And it might not sound a big deal to say, oh, well, this is like X nanoseconds and this is X nanoseconds. And now to pull the data in, it's a few. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it can spill into like, well, now this whole operation that required this data is now going to have to spill out to a new frame. And that can cause like stutters and other bits and pieces. So I don't know whether the improvements to the cache improvements that were told to me on the PS5 Pro are simply because of RDNA 3.5, or whether it's something that Sony themselves fundamentally tweaked. I would not be surprised if Sony tweaked something and just enhanced something that was part of the PS5 originally, but again, I don't know that for certain. So it could be that this is just something AMD did and Sony are like piggybacking off of it, or it could be that they took AMD's work and tweaked and enhanced it. Either could be right or both could be right. They could have kind of done a mixture of both. Further to all of this, Sony have also made some significant advancements to take advantage of the PS5 Pro using their own software and APIs. I don't really need to say anything more about that. We all know that Sony do a crap ton of work on APIs. Now, I am told that Sony are planning to offer an overview of what the PS5 Pro is capable of, like a technical overview, with Mark Cerny being present, much like he did with the PS4 Pro, the PlayStation 5 and other consoles. Now, whether this is going to happen or not, frankly, I'm still a little skeptical, but I do think it's quite likely, given, of course, we have seen it in the past. It will be very interesting, though, to see how Sony does market the PS5 Pro, depending on the pricing. Now, certainly, if you're already a member of the PlayStation ecosystem, let's say you own a PS5, then I think jumping to a Pro, assuming you have the financial capability to purchase the machine, and also a TV which is going to be able to take advantage of it, in other words, 120Hz or better display with, you know, VRR and all of the goodies that you would kind of look for in a modern display, well, honestly, you're just going to be getting an experience which is just that much better than the base model console. Obviously, not all games will be patched, but there are numerous boost modes that the PS5 does offer, PS5 Pro does offer to help frame rates become more stable with unpatched titles, and of course you can expect games that are more recent, especially from Sony's first-party studios. You can probably imagine like God of War Ragnarok and so on, are all going to be getting patches to just really make full use of what the machine is capable of. And it's going to be very interesting to see, let's say, Spider-Man 2 running on the PS5 versus PS5 Pro, because you can just imagine how much better the ray tracing is going to look. I think it's going to look pretty phenomenal. Now, obviously, if you're a PC gamer primarily and you just kind of dabble occasionally in the PS5 to just play, let's say, Sony exclusive titles like Wolverine, and you don't want to wait for the PC ports or whatever, then maybe you're just going to be happy with the base model console just to kind of play the game and eventually maybe pick it up again on the Pro. But I think the real interesting question is going to be for Xbox owners. Now, if you're not really interested in picking up a PC, and I know not everyone is, and you're currently on the Xbox, there is a good possibility you probably don't want to ditch the Xbox because you've got games on it, you're part of the ecosystem. However, we're already seeing Indiana Jones, we've of course seen the new Doom, and there are a lot of reports that other games are going to be seeing ports as well. Indeed, I have personally heard from a couple of folks that I wouldn't say it's the entire slate, but a large number of games I've heard, everything from Starfield is definitely coming over at some point or another. I think Avowed was another game, and so on and so on. And, you know, it's going to be very interesting because if you even are an Xbox fan, just, you know, you're just ultimately going to be getting a better experience on the PS5 Pro simply because it's just got more compute power. Even if the developers don't 100% take advantage of it, you know, down to the absolute minute details of the architecture, you're still going to be getting higher resolutions, presumably, than what the Series X is capable of. You're probably going to be getting better ray tracing. It's just ultimately going to look better. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Microsoft as well deal with that in terms of marketing. Ultimately, Microsoft can and will, of course, be continuing to port games to the PC. But it's going to be very interesting to see how the next couple of years actually does end up playing out for the consoles. To my understanding, and obviously Microsoft themselves have said that the next generation Xbox is still going to be happening, but yeah, I mean, Microsoft's vision anyway does seem to be lying more in a multi-platform direction, so it's going to be very interesting to see how all of that occurs. With that said, guys, hopefully you have enjoyed this video. I am very much looking forward to the PS5 Pro. I am much more of a PC gamer, as regular viewers know, but I'm still probably going to be picking up the Pro anyway, because, well, I'll just be honest with you guys, I want Wolverine. It looks very fun, so, you know, I want the best visuals possible. I'll probably give up my base model console, probably going to give it to my uncle, because he's retired, so, you know, he kind of plays on PlayStation, so, yeah, probably give the PS5 to him, because at the moment he's just got a PS4, and yeah, so at the very least it gives him a nice system, and me, well, you know, that means I get to play shiny games in the best visuals possible. By the way, sorry for the slightly inconsistent stuff with the camera recently and just not putting up as much content. As I've mentioned in a previous video, I got absolutely ravished with like some type of stomach bug almost a week ago now, and it just wasn't good. So I'm pretty much mostly recovered now, but, you know, still not 100%, so yeah. But with that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.